Good morning, everybody. I got my coffee, I got my vape. Let's talk a little. Throughout history, I don't think there's ever been anyone who has never gone through this experience. That's knowing that you need to do something to achieve something else and not being able to get yourself to do it. Well, that's going to be a heavy one. Let's take a sip to get ready. I relate a lot of things lately to bass playing. Mainly that's because that's what I've been going through quite a bit, teaching myself how to play bass again. It also really mirrors just about any other experience where it takes learning something, repetition, gaining skills, gaining momentum, achieving a goal, getting to where you want to go. But I could also talk about sports. I could talk about just about anything that anybody achieves greatness. But I'm going to stick to music. One of my biggest goals right now is to get my chops back on the bass. I want to start playing sessions again. I've got to train my muscles to do what they used to do. I got to get to a point where I was before I started having problems physically, and I want to go beyond that. I'm just so inspired by the videos and the lessons and the things that I've been plugging into through this process. To achieve that, I've got to practice. I've got to stretch myself. I've got to schedule time. My schedule didn't clear when I decided to do this. It actually got more and more complicated. My plate is so full, things are falling off the side. So to do this, I have to schedule time. Well, once I've scheduled that time, then I've actually got to force myself to do what I don't like to do, or there's no point in me scheduling that time in. I've got to achieve it in that time frame that I have it. So how do I do that? That's a big question. I know we just took a sip, but I'm going to take another sip because I need to contemplate that. As I said in my last coffee with Phil, and I've said quite a few times before, I had a hard time progressing when I was first playing music, especially playing music professionally. I didn't have a problem with learning the songs, and I didn't have a problem with learning songs that inspired me, but I did have a problem with practicing. Throughout my career, I've met all kinds of musicians that I would love to hate if they weren't such great people. I had one friend that's an amazing musician. He's the kind of guy that decides he wants to pick up an instrument that generally takes people years and years and years to perfect, and he's up on stage playing it within a month. I remember when he first decided he wanted to pick up mandolin. He would get out of bed, he would pick up the mandolin. He would get in the shower, he'd come out, he'd pick up the mandolin. If he answered the door, he was going to be holding that mandolin. He was always shedding on that. He was transcribing other players. He was picking things apart. It was just amazing. He was actually playing that sucker within a month from stage. And within a couple of months, he was, in my opinion, a master at it. I've met other people like that. They just didn't seem to have a problem with getting themselves to practice. That wasn't me, and it frustrated me. I did figure out a technique to overcome that, and I've incorporated it in many different aspects of my life. It didn't fix the procrastination. It didn't fix that I didn't want to do it. It didn't even fix that I had to force myself to start. What it did do is it caused me to not focus on that task that I didn't like to do and focus on something that inspired me. What got me to practice at first was I knew that I needed to do it. It was completely and total stubbornness and discipline. So I would sit down and I would practice, and at the end of practice, I hated the whole experience. I really did. There was nothing enjoyable about it. Once I started to actually get to a level where I was able to do things that I wasn't able to do before, then I was inspired. That helped me to be able to sit down and actually start. It didn't make the process any more enjoyable. As a matter of fact, when you play an instrument, I know for sure guitar and bass, absolutely, there is a warm-up period. You sit down and your muscles are not ready to just jump in and play to your top level. Your muscles are cold and you have to stretch them, you have to warm up. It takes a few minutes for them to get to the point where they will play what you want them to play. In those few minutes, you can definitely get frustrated, bored, distracted, and stop practicing. One of the tricks that I learned was to just give myself a certain amount of time. When I sit down to do any kind of practicing for any activity that I don't enjoy that I need to do, I make sure I do it for at least 5 minutes. I can make myself do just about anything for 5 minutes. I can even be in pain for 5 minutes if I know after that 5 minutes I'm no longer being in pain, but I'm also going to feel better. I do it every single day when I stretch. But I'd give myself an out. After 5 minutes, I'm not into something, I'm not enjoying it, I'm not playing as well as I'd like to, I get up and do something else. I don't feel discouraged about that. I don't feel disappointed, and I don't beat myself up because I did what I committed to do. 5 minutes. I can do 5 minutes of anything. Probably about 95% of the time, I would forget that I was keeping track of time. My fingers would warm up and I would get into playing something. It was either something that I wasn't able to play before, or I was getting faster and better at playing something that was challenging me. Or inspiration took over and I was creating something that I really got into. If that happened, I could go for hours and hours and hours. I'm blessed to have a wife that keeps track of that for me because when I get into that kind of mode, I won't eat, I won't sleep. I will just do that. But she always reminds me, hey, Phil, it's time for supper. You need to eat. That technique really works. Even with mowing the lawn, I'll get out there and I'm going to push that lawnmower for 5 minutes. If I absolutely hate it, then I'm going to stop and I'll schedule another time to start it again. That doesn't make my lawn look really good for the neighbors a lot of times, but it works really well for me. Another trick is that I redirect what I'm focusing on. Instead of focusing on that thing that I don't like to do, I focus on where I want to go. I talked about goals last week, about having your big mountain goal. That's going to be a reference point. It's going to direct you in the right direction. And then I talked about the river goals, all the smaller goals along the way. I didn't have a driver's license until I was 18, so I walked a lot of places. One of the things that I did is I would know where I was going. I know about how much time it was supposed to take me, but instead of concentrating on that journey, I would pick something just past where I could see comfortably. Now that's not too far from me, I'm a little hard of seeing, but I would pick a store, I'd pick a lamp, or I'd pick a street light or a car or something like that. That was a goal, I would hit it, I would celebrate. That's what I use to get myself to do what I don't want to do. I'm sitting down, I'm warming up, I'm doing exercises. My goal at that point is, let's say, a certain song or a certain piece, or it could be just an exercise, a scale or something. I will focus on achieving that scale. When I actually achieve that, I am very excited. I celebrate. It's amazing. So when I sit down the next time, I'm not thinking, oh man, I've got to sit down and practice. No, I'm thinking, man, I did that thing. I can't wait to get back to it. I'm going to go further than I did last time. Before I knew it, momentum had kicked in. Old brother Mo. And I looked back and I'd become a much better player. At one point, I looked back and I realized that I'd become the player that I always wanted to become when I first started playing bass. Of course, I'm not happy with that because at that point, I wanted to be so much better and I had bigger goals in mind. But it was a lot more enjoyable and it was a lot easier for me to sit down and practice. Matter of fact, a lot of times I couldn't wait to sit down and practice. Right now, I can't wait to take a sip of coffee. After doing this process for many years, it's gotten easier for me to do it. A lot of the time, it's just instinctual. I don't even think about it. That's just what I do. But that's not to say that I don't still give myself the 5 minutes. Sometimes I barely make it to that 5 minutes and I move on to something else. That 5 minutes is really important. It gives me time to get over the awkward. It gets me time to put all the other crap aside that I'm focused on that I'd rather be doing or that I think that I need to be doing and get into what I'm actually doing and get a little bit of momentum going. Warm up and get to a place where I'm actually starting to get a little better at what I'm doing. So I'm kind of tricking my brain a little bit. I don't want to burn myself out. I'm trying to get away from the dread of doing something. So the worst thing that I could do is to force myself to do that thing when it's miserable for a long period of time. That's going to cause momentum going in the other direction. The next time it's going to be harder for me to force myself to do that. And it's also going to take longer for me to get into that zone. The whole time I'm going to be focusing on, man, I really don't want to do this. I'd rather do something else. Hey, YouTube. It all boils down to 5 minutes. Think about it. Can you do just about anything for 5 minutes if what you're going to get out of it is worth it? Or if you know after that 5 minutes, you're going to start having fun at what you're doing. Now that I think about it, I actually used this quite a bit when I was in the process of overcoming my social phobias. I enjoyed being in the mall, and I used that as an exercise to force myself to be in a social situation, and also to be able to practice the skills that I was developing to overcome my social phobias. And then again, I wouldn't force myself to stay in that situation beyond a certain point. I would do it for about 30 minutes. 5 minutes wasn't enough. I didn't do that at the beginning of that process, and it had really bad effects. It would actually get to the point where I would have panic attacks, and I'd get migraines beforehand. I would get nausea, I would throw up, different things like that. Sometimes I'd get so sick they would knock me out of doing anything for that day. Once I started implementing stay in the mall for 30 minutes, even if I was just focusing on the time, let's say it's been 25 minutes, I've got 5 more minutes, I can do this for 5 more minutes. Okay, now I only have 3 minutes, I can do this for 3 minutes. Now that wasn't the right way to think. I was still focused in on the fact that I didn't like what I was doing or the unpleasantness of it, but it started a habit of jumping into something and staying there for a certain amount of time. Thinking back on it, I think that was probably the one thing that helped the most for me to be able to overcome my social phobias. Well, I just lost my train of thought, so I'm going to take a sip and review where I'm at. Well, I guess that's it. It's not a really big subject. I think a lot of the most powerful things are actually the smallest things when you think about them. I've been really focused on trying to get these coffees with Phil in a certain time frame. I don't want them to be too long, but then again, I don't want them to be too short. But I've decided that some of the ideas don't need to be 15, 20 minutes long for me to get my point across. So I'm not going to worry about that too much. This may be a short one, this may not be, but I'm done. So let's take another sip and celebrate me being done. Yay! This isn't the only trick to getting yourself to do what you don't want to do. There's books that were written on that. I think there's actually one, How to Get Yourself to Do What You Don't Want to Do. And I can't remember the author. I know I've read it. I probably have it in my Audible library. It's just the main one that I use, and it's worked really, really well for me. So give it a shot. Maybe it'll work for you. Maybe it won't. I bet you a lot of you have your own little techniques. I know you have if you've become successful at anything. Please share them with us. Write it down in the comments. Or just say, hey, Phil. Well, if you're new to my channel, please take a look around. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll find some other videos that you like as well. If you did like this little talk, please consider subscribing, hit the like button, maybe even sharing this with somebody else that you think might benefit from it. Also hit that ringy-dingy thing so you're notified next time I make another video. And as always, no matter what tune that life plays you, even if it's in practice, always find your groove. Thanks for hanging out again. We'll have some more coffee next week.